Okay, so I want to introduce Professor Carole Boyce Davies, who is a Frank H.T. Rhodes Professor of Human Letters, Professor of Africana Studies and Literatures in English at Cornell University. She has a Bachelor of Arts degree in English from the University of Maryland, Eastern Shore, Master of Arts in African Studies from Howard University, and a PhD in African Literature from the University of Ibadan in Nigeria. So she's been on the continent before. Now, Professor has held distinguished professorships at a number of institutions, including Haskowitz, Professor of African Studies and Professor of Comparative Literary Studies, and African American Studies at Northwestern University in the USA. She has authored numerous books and articles. And actually, she was co-editor with Ali Mazrui. Some of you might know Ali Mazrui, and Isidore Okwero on the African diaspora, African origins, and New World identities. She is also an editor of an encyclopedia of African diaspora. She's a member of the UNESCO Committee for General History of Africa and a past president of Caribbean Studies Association. And her writing has been featured in the media, including Washington Post, Miami Herald, Trinidad, Guardian, among others. So Professor, karibu sana to speak to us.
Everybody, how you doing? Jambo. Can you please stand up, everybody? Let's stand. I know you came to do that. So, everybody, you can sit down now. I'm bringing you greetings from all the people like me who live in what they call the Americas, meaning North and South America and the Caribbean. I am from the Caribbean. Who knows where the Caribbean is? Tell me. If you don't, everybody has a cell phone. I saw you looking at your phone. Look, Google Caribbean, and somebody will tell me what you find. Can you tell me what you know? This is why you have a phone. It's not just to talk to your friends. It's to get information. This is like walking around with a computer. So anything you want to know, you can tell me what you know about the Caribbean.
Gracious afternoon. Yeah, I know about the Caribbean because I was interested in the blackness actually. I was fighting racism, so I knew about the islands when I was in India. They told me, you come from West Indies. So some of them told me, where is West Indies? So I was telling them West Indies is not in Africa, but in Central America region, that is between Brazil and USA, from Florida. So the Caribbean islands are a group of islands which form the Jamaica, St. Kitts and Nevis, Barbados, all these countries which are there, where the Africans who had gone there during the Atlantic slave trade, when they wanted to come back to Africa, they used small boats, but they could not cross the Atlantic, so they went down to the islands of the Caribbean. Thank you.
I'm serious. The last one up there with the phone. What did you see about Caribbean on the phone? Anybody? Hello? I stopped hiding, you see. Okay, so that's really good. I'm coming back at you, so you better keep looking if you haven't found it yet. So I'm coming from he mentioned the number of islands between North and South America. Let's correct one thing for him. The West Indies, how did it get that name? Anybody knows? Columbus, you all know who Columbus is? Who is Columbus? Huh? He was a navigator who got money from the King and Queen of Spain to go to see if he could find India. So he went with 3 ships and left Europe and tried to cross over to find India, but of course he was going in the wrong direction and he ran into some islands. And because he thought he had reached India, because the people he saw had long straight hair and so on, because we're the indigenous native people. He thought he had reached India, but he actually did not reach India. He had reached the Caribbean. So he called this place the West Indies. So basically, he named it that. And in fact, he went around naming all the other places he ran into with names that came from Europe. So the place that I come from is called Trinidad and Tobago, which invented something called the steel band. Have you ever heard of the steel band? Oh my goodness, you all need to know about the steel band. It was the only new instrument that was invented in the 20th century. They used oil drums because when the Africans came to the Caribbean, the Europeans banned them from using drums. So after a while, they tried to figure out a way that they could make their own music and use steel drums, beat it into different notes, and out of that, it started giving sound, and that's how you get what's called the steel band. You can Google that too and find it. In fact, right now, if I was a real Trinidadian, the short name is Trini. If I was a real Trinidadian, I would not be here. Why? Because this is the season called Carnival. And when it's Carnival, everybody is on the street dancing and playing music and having a good time. So, but the fact that I'm here means I value you more than that. I value you more. So who lives in the Caribbean? You're right. The indigenous people are still there, but after Columbus came and they brought diseases, they wiped them out, they used them as slaves, many of them died out. So then they ended up bringing Africans from across here, across the whole continent of Africa, to work and cut sugarcane. This is where all the sugarcane and sugar, which according to really famous Africans like Yeoman Bishir and Hugo and others, and Stuart Hall, another famous British Caribbean person, said this is when English people started getting bad teeth because they were using all that sugar and not taking care of their dental care. So they brought Africans there. So the largest population of these islands is called an archipelago. Do you know what an archipelago is? An archipelago, the geography students must know an archipelago. If not, some of these names, I see some people have notebooks, you need to write them down so you can look it up after. An archipelago is a range of islands. So in other words, you can have a series of islands going from Florida, yes, all the way down to Venezuela. All the way down. So think of the map of the Americas, and often many of us from that part of the world, we say that it's a joke because often they don't even show the names of the islands, they show dots. But we are there in big numbers. So from Florida all the way down to Venezuela, you have these different islands. Haiti is one of them. Have you heard of Haiti? Right, so you know Haiti, right? Why do you know Haiti? Who knows? Why is Haiti important? Why is Haiti important? Okay.
Once again, Haiti is important because the Kenyan police are supposed to be deployed there for peacekeeping, and there's a problem that the Prime Minister was murdered, so there's that issue still of Kenyan police being there. My name is Dr. Boyd. I'm teaching journalism and mass comm.
Okay. Okay, but you know what you said? Is they're really planning to send Kenyan soldiers and police, right? There. But that's not why you should know Haiti. You should know Haiti because it was the first country in the Americas, first black country, to decide to get rid of slavery, period. So they had something called the Haitian Revolution, which lasted like 11 years. 1791 ended 1804, where they fought with a man named Toussaint Louverture. Write that down too if you don't know. Toussaint Louverture Louverture, because he was brilliant at opening new pathways to defeat the French, they defeated Napoleon's army, Toussaint Louverture, and the person who closed out the revolution was a man named Dessalines, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, really another important figure. So in other words, throughout our history, which is what Professor McComber is trying to tell you, there are a lot of major names you should know. If you're going to leave this university and be an educated person, you have to be able, if you go to Cornell or wherever you go, and somebody says Toussaint Louverture, you need to know who that is. There's a term we use to describe this. It's called Diaspora Literacy. Definitely write that down. Diaspora Literacy. Meaning, any name that I say, you should know. It should have a string of meanings and echoes that you would understand. So if I say James Brown, I mean it's a different generation, but you know who James Brown is? No? Bob Marley? Diaspora Literacy. So when I was a grad student, and this is a Bob Marley story, you understand diaspora literacy really well. I was went by road from Nigeria all the way to Senegal, Niger, and all those places, went by road with a friend. And then when I got from in between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, my friend was an American, had an American passport. I had a passport from Trinidad. The guys who were the customs guys had never seen that. They kept saying, where is this place? This place does not exist. And I was trying so hard with my little French to tell them where it was. And then I didn't know what else to say. I said, Bob Marley. They were like, it's anti-English. So they knew from just that word. So this is what we mean about diaspora literacy. That there are names that when you say them, you should have an immediate response. So like when we in the Caribbean hear somebody say Jomo Kenyatta, we know. We all know who Jomo Kenyatta is. We know about Tracing Mount Kenya, we know his books. So there are names then that have resonance around the world, and that if you are an educated person, which you are planning to be by the fact that you are in this room, that you are here, then you need to know those names. So that's the other thing I wanted to say. So I thought I would tell you a story. Once there was an old man, and he was sort of standing outside of his house, and then he saw a tiger coming down the street. But the tiger was really struggling, it was tired, it was old, it was like really having a hard time getting. Finally saw the old man, and the tiger asked the old man for some water. He said, can you please give me some water? The old man was like, okay, let me give him some water. So he did. Because the tiger didn't look like he was all right. He gave him the water, and then the tiger felt a little better. And he told the old man, but you know what, I'm still kind of hot. Can I put my head in your little hut so I can at least get out of the sun before I make my way down the road? So the old man thought about it, and he said, okay, why not? So once the tiger put his head in the hut, he gradually pulled in the rest of his body until eventually he was inside the whole hut. And the old man realized something bad had happened. Because guess what? The tiger stayed there. He started doing tiger things. What are tiger things? What are tiger things? Making a lot of loud noise and roaring and dominating the ecosystem in the house. Making everybody wear tiger clothes. Like everybody needs to wear tiger clothes now, right? Even one of the kids called himself Tiger Woods. Imagine that. Taking over the name of a tiger. And then they used to be vegetarian. Instead of that, he made them start eating meat. So he changed the whole structure of how the family lived. So then the family was like, how do we get Tiger out of here? And interestingly, I was telling the stories to some little children. And one of the little girls got up and she said, hail, hail. It was like a little girl. I was like, that's pretty violent. She said, hail. But anyway, how do we get Tiger out of the house? One of the children decided to use music and art, and he came up with a song And the song was, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. And the idea was to get the family to rethink what had happened to them and gradually find a way to ease him out of there. But the problem is all the indigenous people of the world have had that tiger experience, where Europeans have come in, people offered them help in the Caribbean. This was the story. When Columbus landed, the native indigenous Caribs, and this is how the Caribbean got that name, from the native Caribs, the people called Caribs. Those people offered all the photographs of the Caribs, and if you go to England, if you go to Cuba, you will see pictures of this. They're bringing fruits, bowls with pineapples and bananas when they see Columbus coming and the men. Because as you know, with your hospitality, and we did it this morning, you bring water, right? And you have people have a drink, or you wash their hands. So there's a normal courtesy that indigenous people have always used in conjunction with encountering European people. Often these European people took that as weakness, as they did in the Caribbean, and gradually took over the place, used the indigenous people as workers, and actually took some back to Spain to show off to the Queen that these are the people from that place. But they wanted more. What did they want from the Caribbean? Do you all know? And this is one of the terms that people refer to when they talk about places like Guyana in South America. Because the Caribbean is not just the islands as well as some surrounding countries like Guyana. They wanted gold. And when the indigenous people couldn't find the gold, they started cutting off their hands like they did in Belgium, their limbs, trying to tell them, find the gold. And it became like a kind of more than a passion, a kind of craze for them to find gold. So in other words, their encounter with the indigenous people who brought them fruits, welcomed them, was that. The other thing they did was plant flags. And in planting the flags, they claimed these spaces for their own, right? And the other thing they did was, and I no apologies to people who are in the Christian faith, but they brought them Jesus, they brought them Bibles, and they converted them into Christianity, which for those people was not a good thing, because they ended up losing whatever traditional structures they had and were forced into a European system of colonialism. So that story I'm telling you is a story about colonialism. So basically then, diaspora, another term you should write. Diaspora just simply means dispersal. It means scattering. It means the ways in which people are moved from one location to another. And eventually, once they move to those locations, they have to start thinking of how to recreate their culture. So you have Kenyan diaspora in different parts of the Americas, in Europe, and so on. You have you have the larger African diaspora, which refers to the scattering of African peoples all over the world. And this is what Professor Mukuma was saying. You can, everywhere you go in the world, you can find African peoples, Australia, all across Europe, the Caribbean, the Americas. So for us, the diaspora is global. It's a global Black community. So a number of scholars, including a very famous one named W.E.B. Du Bois, that's another name you should know, W.E.B. Du Bois. Du Bois said, each of us, we are experiencing a local phase of a global problem. A local phase of a global problem. Meaning, whatever you're experiencing here, difficulties in education, in getting knowledge, in getting employment, in finding, health with health care, all of these things have to do with experiences that other people around the world are similarly feeling. So the Du Bois logic of defining that as a local phase of a global problem lets you understand that you are not alone, that you're part of a global struggle for social justice, for full human rights, and all of that. So how to get tiger out? There are a number of ways that we have tried to do it. Some of these have been through personal connections. And this is where Pan-African Connections, a book I'm going to leave with your library, comes. Pan-African connections have been personal. And what have been those personal connections? Marriages sometimes, a number of people from here, married women, or the opposite, from other locations around the world, right? Friendships, right? Marriages, friendships. Sometimes just travel, like how I'm here talking to you. This is a Pan-African connection. So I'm making connection with you. And after I leave, you're going to remember a few things, hopefully, that I said, right? Definitely cultural connections. What do you think are some of those cultural connections we have as Black people around the world? What are those cultural connections? Think, what do you think? What about dreadlocks? What about hair? What about hip hop culture? What about music? Right? Food. So hair, fashion, food, dance, and a range of other things. So a lot of times when people, this is probably a little bit risky for your audience, but you're at university. So a lot of people, when they see Caribbean women dancing and doing a lot of that figure eight hip movement, you know, the body goes like this, like this. I can do that one. One assume that it's vulgar or it's obscene, but then African women do a number of those dances themselves in social spaces, in celebratory spaces, for all kinds of reasons. So it's a question of how do we re-understand or reconfigure things that we take for granted. So cultural connections, definitely food. So across the Caribbean, a lot of the foods that are considered your food stuff here would be similar things that we would use as well. Because when the Africans went from here, they carried the logic of how to prepare food. So the so-called soul food in the United States is coming from Africans' ability to start planting crops. So there are two ways they did this. Remember we said it took them there to cut cane and plant sugar cane for harvest. But there was also another thing that Africans did while they were there. They would plant a garden in their backyard. And in that garden they would have fruit, they would have papaya, they would have greens, they would have plantain, banana trees, and so on. And out of that found ways to prepare African foods. Definitely political connections, and these political connections are still alive. They were part of what became the independence movement that led to countries like Kenya getting independence in 1963, Jamaica and Trinidad in 1962. Ghana even before that, right? So essentially, the political connections that African peoples found once they were able to meet each other in a location like England and learn that their experiences, again, remember that W.B. Du Bois phrase, right? A local face of a global problem. They began to see the similarities and commonalities of their experience. And it's really out of that that you end up with independence. And I was jokingly telling my colleague Makoma here that when the British left, and you all are still the beneficiaries of independence, so you don't have that as part of, seriously as part of your legacy. But when the British left the Caribbean, for example, there were only like 2 or 3 schools, honestly, and this is, we're talking about the 60s. And those schools were connected to the churches, the Catholic Church or the Anglican Church, and so on. So since independence, and your country's done the same thing. Since the 1960s then, onward, these countries that were exploited by the British, by the French, by the Portuguese, and actually almost all of them, because I went to Tanzania last year and I realized that the Germans were really heavily part of that colonial structure. So when these people left, there's another term you should write, extractive colonialism, meaning that you go to that place and you suck out as many of the resources as you can and you take it to Europe. So all the big castles, when you go to England, some of you have been, I'm sure, you will see almost all those castles, almost all the jewels, almost everything that the British have. They have taken it from around the world. And they don't hide it, you know. When you go in a British museum, it's labeled and marked. This is from India, this is from here, this is from there. So, I know I'm probably taking long, right? I'm going to finish. So, the political connections that came from people finding ways to reconnect. And then definitely the intellectual connections, which is what I do and which is what many of us do, and which is what started a movement in the United States that's called Black Studies or Africana Studies or African American Studies or African Studies. So these universities created institutions whereby you can have people studying their histories and their culture. Fortunately for you, your university has a very strong Swahili language department, which means that there's a space already here, and I would imagine the general ethos of the whole institution is to make sure that you get that knowledge. So who are we then? We are global citizens. So think of global citizenship. Don't think of yourself of course only as a Kenyan citizen, that's number one, but also as a global citizen, a person living in the world, and therefore with a responsibility to know, to be educated, to be aware, and to develop your consciousness, to develop a certain kind of activism then, so that you understand who you are in the world, mentally, physically, spiritually. Thank you very much.